Hello and welcome once again, Team Rabbit Hole Edition 12 with Jim and Cullen. Hello and welcome, good evening, thank you so much for joining.
What up, what up?
Hi, pleasure to be on.
So, of course, I'm totally stoked that the three of us get together. Jim, I let you lead the charge.
Well, I think it's synchronistic as already, just because this morning I do daily tarot card jams, and I pull the Three of Cups, and the clarifier was the Three of Pentacles. This is episode 12, which numerologically reduces to 3. So I'm feeling it already. And I've been trying to talk to Cullen forever. For years I've been hitting him up, and he's been very diligently doing his thing. So I just want to say thanks for giving me some time, and hopefully you have as much fun as I think we're about to have.
Hi, great to be on, and it's great to finally connect with Jim. We've been trying to do this for a while, but I've been have a lot going on constantly, so it's good to finally get it rolling.
Well, I don't know if Rafael wants to do the introduction of kind of what Cullen's all about, or if I should, or what. What do you say, Raf?
Well, Jim, I would totally, as I said, let you lead the charge.
And obviously, Cullen, if there's anything you want me to say that I leave out, do it. Bottom line, Cullen is the head honcho and creative kind of magister of the Lifting the Veil, which is a YouTube series. He's got Patreon, Lifting the Veil. Largely speaking, he's into esoteric etymology, kind of showing the correspondences of physiology to mystery schools and their kind of wisdom through kind of hieroglyphics or any other kind of means, and showing people all sorts of stuff. I don't. It's such an insoluble kind of red pill to swallow that I don't know where to begin. He's put hours and hours and hours of content out there. If you have not seen his stuff, check it out. Go onto YouTube and type in "Lifting the Veil." There's a beautiful series that I just finished called "Symbols of Power." It's 4 parts, I believe, multiple hours, so get your popcorn ready. But this stuff is going to fucking melt your face. I guess I could, Cullen, is there anything else you want to say in terms of like how you would introduce yourself?
No, not really. It's I'm not real big on intros personally. I just like to focus on really cool information, and I got started out with more sort of conspiratorial notions, and as I progressed and became more diligent in my research, I just started unintentionally ending up back at human anatomy and physiology, and ultimately it's leading me all into health and nutrition and nutritional science, which a lot of my audience basically is not really into, because I guess it can seem boring or whatever. But after all the research I've done with all the esoterica, it's literally it all comes back to health and nutrition and nutritional science. That's literally the pinnacle of esoteric wisdom and enlightenment. That's literally, that's where it all began, was with alchemy, was in basically understanding the human body and how it works, why it's here, how it functions, what our purpose is, and all that stuff. So I found that actually the pinnacle of that is actually in modern nutritional clinical science, which completely goes, everyone will hate me saying that, at least as far as my own audience. They're like, they think it's like irrelevant or boring, or a lot of people complain actually that I focus so much on nutritional science. But that's my revelation, is where it's all leading, is that's the pinnacle of enlightenment, and esoteric wisdom is leading into the understanding of how important health and nutrition is, because that's what makes up the body, and that's what makes up essentially that's what fuels our consciousness, and as far as the physical vehicle goes. So that's what I've been focusing on lately. But that's about it for my intro and why I'm into all of this.
We have had many presenters, both in terms of spiritual topics and also often including the health topics alongside, or even also pointing out this very strict, let's say, or strong resonance between these topics. To me, just what you mentioned is very obvious and is in a sense, the straight path, in my view, also because nutrition and, let's say, personal well-being, both spiritually, emotionally, but then also, of course, physically, and then understanding, let's just say, all the different layers from a potentially, chemical layer to energetic layers, emotional layers, and then all these different things, from biological transmutation to scalar waves, and all of these things combined, which I assume are all part also of your investigations, then just really brings it home in terms of this is where it really gets definitely practical. So even if someone cannot maybe deal so easily with the philosophical concepts, even though they're quite physical as well, but the nutritional side or the health understanding of one's own body, I think, just has immediate benefits. And of course, it is a positively virtuous cycle, because the more energy the body has by treating it properly and aligning it properly, the more energy is also available for any type of spiritual revelation. And what's your view on that?
I completely agree entirely. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it's about.
I just want to say, when I started waking up, there's a few kind of pockets of waking up, if you want to call it that. Back in 2003 when I was in high school was one, but I shut that shit down. I had some out-of-body experience and kind of kundalini hiccups, as I would call them. But more recently, 2012, 2013, 2014 is when I was really kind of coming to consciousness in a new and different and profoundly initiated way, kind of vibes. And Cullen, straight up, man, turning on to your posts, and it was leaving me breathless, but it was also the time when I was just kind of engorging myself on kind of esoteric jargon from Jung to the I Ching to astrology. So I was kind of in a cornucopic mode of just eat it all, like Pac-Man, going for it all. And now I'm more of at a point where I'm kind of trying to digest what I've imbibed. But you had a really big impact on waking me up, where I started seeing so many correlations between so many things. You've done so much research and so much homework, and I just said so many times, emphasizing the point, you've done your work, dude, and I want to give you a big pat on the back. I know you're a Cancer first house sun with Chiron in the first house. I know sometimes life can feel uphill, and maybe it doesn't always feel like roses and fucking lottery tickets, but you're doing the work, bro. So my hat off to you. I don't know where I even want to begin. The power, the Symbols of Power videos are really, really intense and profound. We won't probably dwell there long, but that was one area that I think is kind of where I'm wondering, maybe a good place to start. What we're talking about is spirituality, but it seems like you have a very embodied approach to it. Like it is all very not what you're doing particularly, but it's like magic and spirituality can be very woo and disconnected, and you're kind of tethering it and embodying it in such a way that it's very materially relevant. It's not just this esoteric kind of pie in the sky stuffs. What is your, out of curiosity, I've wanted to ask you this for a while, and if you don't have an answer, that's fine, and if you don't want to answer this, plead the fifth or whatever. But how it seemed to me like you were always kind of pushing more into not a materially reductionistic realm, but kind of a resonant realm where it's like the dream has mechanics, the dream, samsara, whatever this whole thing is, consciousness, matrix or whatever, is still a very physicalized and replete system of kind of systems within systems. What's your ontological position? Like, how do you look at the world? Do you have a kind of a way of approach to it? Has it changed?
Honestly, I'm not really quite sure how to answer that, but basically what I can say is that, honestly, I've with the Symbols of Power, I've more sort of focused on, and in all of my research that I'm doing lately, I'm more focusing in on just syncing the threads and all the points of data, just syncing all these points that they already sync together on their own. But so I'm just following that thread that syncs it all together, and I'm sort of taking what I've learned from the sync group has sort of taught me a lot more about basically just follow the flow of sync, and not try and draw too many of my own personal conclusions from it. Although a lot of people like to criticize that, that's one of the flaws about the Symbols of Power series is they're always saying that I'm so like dictatorial about like what the conclusions are, but it's actually not like that. Is that I just see the patterns in everything, mostly symbolically, and that's usually how I come to all of these realizations is either by the language, by somehow stumbling onto some sort of etymological or linguistic connection. And I'm not sure how it usually happens. It usually happens like I will see. I don't know how any of this stuff comes to me. It's usually I will see a symbol, or someone posts like a graphic, or sometimes I'll see a piece of artwork or something, and I immediately like it's just everything connects, like the web just comes together. And so as I start like chasing that one little thing, like once I get into that mindset, like it's becomes like a gravity well, like a vortex opens up, and literally everything starts falling right into place, like without me even having to try or think about it. It's literally like something is, leading me, along this thread to basically, just throwing all these, things right into my lap, and it's just my job to sort of sync it all together and put it together, and and put it out there in a way that makes sense. And again, I don't always really know what sort of conclusions to draw from that. I just like sort of get in the zone, and I sort of try to take myself out of it and just let the things flow. And that's usually as far as like a structure of the world and stuff. My worldview is that's. Honestly, I don't know. Like, it's weird. Like when I first started out on my path, I sort of had a lot more confidence, sort of had a lot more clear picture of what, of what I thought, the world and reality and everything was. And honestly, in some ways, I think that I was like a little bit more, had a little bit more understanding of like what everything was. But now that I'm like getting so much deeper into like the details and filling out a lot of those things that were vague at the beginning, it's sort of, now I'm at that stage where I'm kind of like at a point where I'm not confused, but I'm just at a point where I'm like, I'm not so sure anymore.
That's actually a beautiful place, because straight up, I'm in a similar place. It feels like there was a punctuation, and this kind of correlates actually to solar maximums, ironically, right around that 2012 portal and in 2013, 14, 15, kind of when I was turning on to all your stuff, probably through the Sync book and all the Synchromystic kind of communities, because that's probably where I turned on to your stuff and we started kind of chit-chatting. There was more of a confidence. It felt more like a Aries energy, where it's just like moving forward without like impulsive and kind of doing it. And now there's kind of, it's hermit card mode more for me, where I'm like kind of contemplating and kind of trying to weigh models. Not that it's just it's a refinement process. It's part of alchemy. It's all good. So don't beat yourself up too much. This is how it works. You 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. It's just how it doth go when it comes to illumination in the path. But so when I say materially reductionistic, like, I'll just say a little quick story, and I don't even really have to go into it. Back in 2011 in November, so 11/11, I came back from living in Honolulu, Hawaii for 2 years, excuse me, and I was basically selling weed and just drinking beer and kind of living the bachelor life, delivering pizzas, not giving a fuck about reality particularly, and just kind of riding the waves and being a consumer, kind of passive and hedonist basically. And my friend hooked me up with some DMT, and I had heard some McKenna lectures, but I wasn't even really into that stuff at that point. So I knew it was like the Mount Everest of psychedelics basically, and it lasted about 5 minutes, and it was no joke. But I kind of went home, was expecting like, I don't know, Van Gogh vision, like the wall to morph, maybe nothing profound. I wasn't really ready for what happened. Long story short, I blasted off, broke through a fucking Sahasrara chakra, and then all of a sudden I was in what I think is the Hall of Amenti, talking to Anubis and Mott. But since that first punctuation through the veil or whatever the fuck was going on there, because I'm not sure if it was like Jungian archetypes and I was interacting with them, or if they were parts of my physiological mind, like my hypothalamus and my, pituitary gland, and I'm projecting kind of anthropomorphized archetypal story interaction onto them. All this kind of aside being said, with what you've been doing, it really pushed home to me the occult nature of, like, the esoteric anatomy, basically, of Egypt and other cultures, where this is largely secrets in plain sight, as a video series has been put out by Scott Onstadt called that. Really good stuff. If you guys haven't seen it, check it out. Secrets in Plain Sight. It's more about America and kind of cityscapes and Freemasonic kind of designs. But the point is, Egypt seemed to have very kind of medical documentation and spiritualizing it in a way that was hidden for us. I don't know if you think we're in yugas and we've just fallen away from an ability to see and perceive these things clearly, or if some people were just initiated into these things, could see the forest for the trees, and largely people generally don't see that kind of stuff. That's kind of what I was asking earlier about the material reductionism. It seems we're living within a very, basically an orgy of polarity, Shiva Shakti kind of interchanges on a material forms, like magnetic poles or whatever, masculine, feminine interchange. And these kinds of systems have material bases. Like, it's not just like, one day you'll get to heaven and all this kind of metaphysical speculation. It's like we're in a dream that it has a schematic to it in a way, and the schematic is working through certain principles. That's kind of what I was asking in terms of like what your position is. I don't need you to like pinpoint anything, but sometimes when I'm listening to your stuff, I'm like, wow, it's not taking the magic out of it for me, but I'm a double Gemini, so I tend to be kind of more of an intellectual dreamer, and it starts making it very practical, and it almost scares me, where it's just like, whoa, this is like seeing things as they really are. But it kind of grounds it in a materially reductionistic way, and I don't mean that in a negative connotation. It's more just like seeing the schematic and kind of the engineering of reality. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and is that what happens? What happens is I just tend to see how, like, so many, if not all, I mean, it's pretty well known that, I can't remember any quotes off the top of my head, but I know, Pythagoras had said, that know thyself and ye shall know the universe and all the gods. And then Campbell had also echoed that throughout his work as well, and also in, some of his own personal quotes. All the heaven and hell is within us, and and from the ancient Egyptian proverbs, the kingdom is within, and whoso shall find it. To the Greek oracle at Delphi, know thyself, temet noce, and so it's this this ancient hermetic principle that actually predates even Egypt itself, to who knows how far back, to Atlantean, the mother culture, the mother language, the mother symbolism. But yeah, so it definitely, it seems like this was well known, and I'm not actually going out like hunting any of this stuff or looking for it. It's just and nor do I really want to or like to, because it seems that when I like, if I like try to force something, like especially with writing, if I try to force anything, it comes out basically the ego or the personal self sort of imprints its own things onto it. So I like to let things just lead me. That's also one of the reasons why I choose not to read any books, specifically for that reason. A lot of people could criticize that as being like very not very well read at all, but I like it to be that way, because it's literally like this cosmic game of hide and seek, or this game of lost and found that at least I'm playing with myself. I don't know about everyone else, but I'm sure this probably applies to everyone else as well. But it feels like a game of like cosmic hide and seek or lost and found, and it's like we have buried all of these archetypes. We buried all this knowledge within the veil of allegory and archetypal mythology, and fairy tales and folklore and all of these things as not just, you know, conscious or spiritual, basically egregores, you know, to basically create this akasha of information that we share intellectually, as we all share the same, you know, collective consciousness that we just draw from. But to bring it back down to the physical and the material level, that's just where it all comes out for me. Is that it's preserved through basically through the symbols and the language, and these are all sort of just direct correspondences with the human anatomy, the physiology, as well as, you know, the principles and the dynamics of the cosmos at large. You know, again, from the man is the measure of the universe, as Protagoras of Abdera had said as well, is that, you know, we are literally the bridge between the macrocosm and the microcosm. In other words, you know, the microscopic scale and, you know, to the human body, which is literally the bridge between the macrocosmic scale of the cosmos, of the universe itself. And I've got some even more
Yes, some even more.
Is my thing working?
Yes, now you're back again. Yes, you got some more. Yes.
Yeah, my finger must have slipped off the button. But yeah, so got some even more, but I don't want to go into that because it's sort of off topic. But yeah, how each.
Maybe just to bring it home, and potentially it was slipping up again. Maybe if you would like to just give us a very brief rundown of what I find very interesting. Simply, I believe your most recent video about the standing wave within the brain and the phi ratios, and then also as above, so below the belt, as the title of the show today says. Maybe you would just like to get into that briefly, just that everyone gets a clear picture of one quite impressive example.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's a good one. And that is something that I can pretty easily summarize, but it goes very deep because it involves so many different things, from the etymology, the language, the linguistics itself is extremely complex and extremely complicated. So that's to make those connections is where it can. I would actually have to have, you know, the work like right in front of me to be able to read from it. But the as above, so below the belt is something that, you know, it's obviously. It's a play that I've sort of extended off of, you know, the traditional Hermetic as above, so below. But I ended up like somehow just realizing that most of the geometry is so the sacred geometry, obviously, as most of us are probably more than well aware, is the underlying structure of, you know, not just physical matter, but the actual dynamics of the physics that create physical matter, you know, out of the principles of duality and polarity, which come together literally, as well as you know, symbolically or sexually. They literally come together. So, you know, it's this principle of how the universe creates by the unity of the oneness divides itself into polarity, so that those polarities can then create interchange and flux, which creates motion and movement. And the way things create movement is through the spiral, is through spin. Things come into motion by spinning, and it's that spin of that geometry that actually creates physical structure and physical matter. And so the way I've found that it correlates from basically on three levels. So not just duality, not just dualistically, such as in the brain and in the sexual regions, in the sexual glands, but there's that Midgard, that middle earth, which is the heart level. So it's a trinity of creation. It's psychosomatic, which is physically as well as mentally, and it is bridged by the heart level, the heart chakra, as we're probably more than familiar with. But there's this extremely unique, like I'm constantly finding more and more correlations to this, of how, you know, between the geometric structure of the brain, which is literally a Pisces shape, which is essentially it's a dyad, which is, you know, two spheres interlocked with the mandorla, which means almond shaped at the very center, which literally creates the third ventricle of the brain, which is literally that little cavity at the very center of our brain, which is essentially, it's the innermost chamber. It's the very center of the brain, which is literally a little, it's a little cavity which houses the cerebrospinal fluid, where the cerebrospinal fluid is actually created in the third ventricle by the most delicate layer of the brain is called the pia mater, which literally is Latin for tender mother. And so it's that inner ventricle, that third ventricle, what is also has been called the cave of Brahma. In other words, the cave, the sacred cave, where all the masters go to meditate inside the cave in order to attain enlightenment. And man, we could go off infinitely into this is literally what I'm writing. I'm trying to get a whole book written out about all of this, because I mean, it's endless. It literally, all the myths, all the fairy tales, all the stories, all the allegories, all the mythologies, many of the gods, many of the deities, they're all portraying so many the various different organs, the glands, the dynamics, and all of this stuff. I mean, it's literally, that's what the Holy Grail is. The Holy Grail is as above, so below the belt as well. So that inner chamber, that inner third ventricle, where the cerebrospinal fluid, which is the Christ, the chrism, Greek for oil or anointed, where we get anointed with where our brain itself is anointed with the cerebrospinal fluid, which the cerebrospinal fluid is a salty solution, SAL, keyword there, SALSOL, salvation, solution, salvation, salivation, salve, on and on and on. I've got a whole book written out about all of that etymology as well. It goes so deep as well. But so that's where the Christ is born, is in the third ventricle. That is the manger where the Christ is born, but it's also the tomb where the Christ is laid to rest and then is also resurrected. So he's born in the manger, which is the third ventricle, and then he throughout the course of his life, he eventually descends to hell. So the timeline is not it's a little bit off from the actual story, but those are little nuances that aren't really important. It's the overall, correspondences of all of these things. But so then it travels down to the sexual regions, which is hell. The base of the spine, the sacrum, the sacred sacrum of sacrifice, where we must go to the underworld and to sacrifice ourselves before we can attain enlightenment. And of course, this is the cycle of the hero's journey, as most of us are probably well aware of. Is you begin your journey as an initiate into the mysteries. You begin through the darkness, through the underworld. You have to go through, and in ancient Egypt, there were no entrances into the Great Pyramid. We had to blow that shit open with dynamite in the whenever they did it. When was it, the 1920s or maybe before that? But anyways, they had to blow it open. So before that, it was completely sealed, and the only entrance in was through the underworld. They had to go through the cave of labyrinth, and the passages in order to, enter into the underworld. So this is symbolically represented as going into the rabbit hole, team rabbit hole. That's what we're talking about here. So you begin that journey into the underworld, and then you eventually attain enlightenment. So it's the process of physiology itself, where, it begins actually in the brain, and then it descends, cerebrospinal fluid descends to the base of the spine, and then it travels back up, where it again is crucified, and that's where it becomes holy or sanctified in the inner sanctum, which is the third ventricle of the brain once again. And so that is also, again, that's literally the Holy Grail, and I've shown that in the Symbols of Power series. And this is completely original. Like, as far as I've found, I haven't seen anyone else who had prior made this connection that it's the left and right lateral ventricles of the brain. So there's four ventricles. There's the lateral ventricles, which are the lateral horns, which are literally Amun's horn, which Jupiter Amun was the ancient ram-headed horned god, the horned one. And this is also why, the horned one is symbolically portrayed in many ways as well, and I've corresponded how that's also symbolically represented in the brain as well. But it's also, again, as above, so below the belt, how the horned one also represents the female uterus, as most of us are probably well familiar with by now. That's a pretty common one that pretty much everybody knows, is that the ram's head is also symbolic of the female uterus. So again, the female uterus is also typically mythologically known as the Holy Grail. The sacred chalice, the sacred feminine, the sangreal, the holy blood, Holy Grail. Obviously, the menstrual blood, which contains stem cells, which provides the elixir of immortality, which is the elixir of life. We're talking about the sacred living waters, which, again, there's multiple sacred living waters. It's the cerebrospinal fluid. It's also the blood, which is literally the elixir of life. It's called the life blood. The ancients, they thought these various different things that were the one thing that gave us life. But of course, it's all of them. They thought the breath is what gives us life. It's the breath of life. But also they thought the blood was literally what gave us life. But also the semen, the sexual fluids. So these are the three, main liquids that are the elixir of life, the elixir of living, the fountain of living waters. So it's found as above as well as so below the belt. And it's not just like, allegorically correspondent. It's literally exact same geometry. It's the exact same symbolic shape. And I've shown that throughout the series, and especially we'll be going even deeper in eventually when I write a book about all of this. But so I hope that's sort of a good summary about it. Once I get going on it, I can go off onto tangents.
You go down the rabbit holes, bro, and it's okay. That's why I appreciate you. And straight up, people, go check out his Patreon, Lifting the Veil. Go check out his YouTube channel, also under Lifting the Veil. What he just kind of gave us a drive-by shooting of is explicitly kind of laid out for hours, and it's fascinating, and it's beautiful, and it's profound. So when you were kind of talking, just little things like David Bowie's at the center of it all, kind of came to mind, where it's just like, yeah, dude,
yeah,
it's all there. And what I'm wondering is because apocalypse means unveiling, right? Tying into Lifting the Veil. So I think we're in the apocalypse. I think we're at the time when the veils are being lifted and rent in very specific ways. I'm not sure how much ancients knew specifically in terms of the kind of postmodern chimera that you're doing. You're kind of correlating so many systems to so many things that Everything is Everything by Lauryn Hill kind of comes to mind, where it's just like, everything is everything. That's the best way I could put it. It's like, nothing is just anything, right? And also like Harrison Ford from Star Wars, where it's like, it's all true. It's like, that's coming to mind, where it's just like, bro, I'm the oldest sibling of 4 siblings, and sometimes I joke and I'm like, I shovel the snow of responsibility so you guys could walk the path. It seems like you've done that for me, and probably others if they go check out your stuff, where you've done all the work. You've done a lot of etymological, linguistic kind of research on the one hand, but as well as medical kind of anatomy and physiological kind of charting of the body. I'm equally stoked. I can get kind of jazzed up and not focused, so I feel you. But what do you think the ancients, how illumined were they? Do you think they had a whole kind of gestalt understanding of things, or were they just getting one, the eye doesn't know what the hand is doing, kind of body of Christ imaging? Did they just have parts of the knowledge and they just knew these completely, and now we're coming to a synthesis point?
That's the core question. That's what it all comes. That's the most common response that I get to after showing all of it. I'll show all of this stuff, and most people will be like, well, okay, so what? They're like, so what does it mean? What do I do with it? How do I use it? It's the bigger question is, what's the greater implication, of all of this stuff? And that's what I sort of summarized at the beginning, where I'm like, honestly, I'm not really, to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure. But, obviously I have my own sort of theories. I usually try to not go into those theories too much, because that's one of the things that I see other people doing way too heavily, is there's way too many wild theories out there that are totally unsubstantiated, and a lot of it is outright incorrect, and so it can basically place, these sort of misconceptions in people's minds, so that once they find a more credible yet less sensational, explanation for it, they tend to completely dismiss that because they've already got this like grandiose, sensational idea in their mind, and it's sort of like a heuristic bias that, they won't accept a more reasonable, down to earth, and more actually evidence supported thing. So that's why I try not to like speculate too much as to what I think it all means. But practically, what we do know is that the ancient Egyptians were incredibly advanced, especially obviously by the building of their megalithic structures, which are entirely, and as we showed in this most recent Symbols of Power film, is entirely corresponding to the human skull, the human anatomy. I mean, what I showed with the Great Pyramid, based off of the inspiration of Gary Osborne's connection with the Great Pyramid and the skull, I never expected to find like how insanely intricate and all these details that directly sync to the human skull. So for that to happen, there's many different like theories that we could propose as to how they knew all of this, or if they did at all, or if it's just a universal sync sort of working through either me or through them, or through it's a connection. So honestly, I'm not sure. But what we do know is that they were very advanced physicians, at least for their time. I mean, I forget exactly his name, but they had discovered cancer, so they were aware of performing pretty intricate and advanced surgeries at their time. They knew how to masterfully mend broken bones, and so they were pretty advanced in their ability, in their physician skills. So I imagine, you had to have a fundamental understanding of the way things work, and they were obsessed with the concept of consciousness. And so I imagine at least they had probably dissected, the human brain in probably as many ways as they possibly could. And I imagine that, at least for their time, even if we don't have any, I don't think we have any records, medical records of like, their archives of the human anatomy or anything like that. But maybe we do, and maybe it's just these archetypal, deities and symbols that's how they actually, that was their medical texts of the time.
It's funny that you say that, because the first post I ever made on Team Rabbit Hole, because right now it's just a meme stash, basically woke drug meme stash. The very first post I ever made was Manly B. Hall's Initiation of the Pyramid, which is kind of getting into the occulted nature of it. And like the Temple of Luxor is very much like the human body. It's almost like we don't need what we tend to look for in kind of a post-scientism, post-Age of Enlightenment, post-Puritan Reformation kind of situation, is like evidence in a handwritten form through letters stamped with approval from on high or whatever. Whereas it seems the megalithic structures, and like you're saying, the mythologies largely were personifications of these systems and awarenesses of these systems. They were using psychedelics, like Egyptians, Mayans, all these people who built crazy stuff were doing mind-altering drugs to the degree that they might be getting into states where they were able to grok and upload or download, or however you want to put that, information and cogently translate it to the material world. Sometimes I'm more of a dualist, and I'm like, oh, there's a spiritual, especially having done DMT and stuff, it's like, oh, there's other things than this kind of holographic matrix that I find to be, quote, normal, and maybe they're kind of retrieving things from that space, but that gets very woo sounding very quickly, which it sounds like you try to, it doesn't, intentionally or not, you're trying to be more tethered, it seems, and grounded and pragmatic about it, which I appreciate, because I love Rafael. He's a Libra with a Pisces North Node. Sometimes he can get very lofty with the it's all a dream. We're just enjoying the ride, walking each other home, Ram Dass style. And I don't disagree with that, but then there's times when I'm very contrarian. I have a lot of Uranus energy, and I'll take the devil's advocate position and be like, well, embodiment matters, all this jazz. It seems like you're kind of the yang to his yin in that sense, and I feel like I can kind of see both your ontological positions playing off each other. And even what you were saying a second ago, kind of with the mythologies, kind of embodying these things. It's not that anything is just anything. I mean, I'm coming from a Judeo-Christian perspective, and I've had enough kind of experiences with that mythos that I think it's more real than just a fabrication and an allegory. But there's obviously allegorical implications, even the Christos fluid, the 33 Jed spine, stuff like that. What seems to be happening in my mind is that there's a, and I don't know if this is what the fall was, whether there's like a as of within so without, so like Atlantis fell or whatever, and then if that's a thing, because I'm inclined to think so, but I'm not 100 on that. The point is, there was kind of this falling into consciousness. Actually, I was just at a rave last week, and I was on acid, and there were some didgeridoo players. I'm in Australia, right? There's some didgeridoo guys. There was no one really there. It was like 2 p.m. The rave hadn't really started, and there's some didgeridoo players playing to psytrance, and I was slipping in. I was standing there kind of aligning my chakras, getting sonically blasted with these tools of the Aboriginals, and which are carved from tree trunks. I mean, this is supernatural kind of primitive magic, if you want to put it that way. And I was getting very, very toroidal vision and kind of dipping into what I felt was dream time, to the degree where I was like, I was just getting into the spirit of the land, let's put it that way. And they even gave me a free CD afterwards, because I was like, yo, that was my first digi experience, like, thank you. And they were like, oh, you're an American, here. So anyway, point is, I totally lost my track of thought. The point is, I get where
you're going with that, was that, that it's multiple layers, and I completely agree, is that, it's like the fall of Atlantis was literally correspondent with the fall of consciousness, of course, as I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's where you're going, correct?
Yes. So, like, with the Dreamtime stuff, because I was having kind of epiphanies, I was like, when we came, because I'm somewhat okay with some people who are in the New Age, like, fuck Darwinian models, that's not true, we're, whatever. And I'm like, I'm not saying there aren't agendas behind science and stuff like that, and maybe, like, nefarious kind of ends to means Machiavellianism stuff's going on sometimes. I don't think that's what's driving the cart necessarily. I'm not sure. I don't put my chips in on that. I don't love to get, like, conspiratorial automatically. I don't want to be paranoid. I'd rather be pro-noiac. But the point is, it seems with the formation of our prefrontal cortex at a very specific point in our human and physiological evolution, we started participating with reality in a very different way, symbolically and linguistically, and in a very kind of prefrontal cortex way, which is what separates us essentially from animals. I mean, we have a reptilian brain, right? We have a mammalian brain, and then we have the human aspect, if you want to put it that way, which is kind of the front seat of our mind, the prefrontal cortex. And what was hitting me when I was kind of on L was people who were in the Aboriginal kind of Australians, I almost said Native Americans, Aboriginal Australians. They're one of the oldest people groups we know of, genetically speaking. And if you're going to be, basically, this sounds crazy, and I'm not being racist, so I have to caveat with that. If you're coming from the kind of primordial soup of animal life as a bipedal kind of hominid, or whatever we were at some point, we started kicking over to what we are now progressively. It wasn't all in one fell swoop. We would start having what they would call dream time, where it's just like, oh, we're kind of having moments of understanding, like the rainbow snake, we need that. And it's like, that's water sources, the river, like, find that shit. And berries, because Aboriginals are straight in tune with the world. They are experiencing it in a very psychic way, in a very non-rational, non-linear way, in a way, which also kind of falls into the kind of topic of the Kabbalistic tree of life, where there's 2 hemispheres to our brain, and it seems that where I'm kind of coming from, and I have to remember this, in my more lucid moments, I know this, like whether I'm meditating or I'm on drugs, like when I say drugs, I mean psychedelics and theogens, I'm like, we're in a living dream. Like, this is beautiful, and like, this is what it is. But then when we're kind of embodied and in normal kind of diurnal, life or whatever, going through the process of being, it kind of loses that magic. But it seems this is what Dark Crystal's all about, right? And in a way, and David Charles Plate, who's part of the Sync book, turned me on to this, where basically one part of the sphere of the brain, and I'm not sure if this is holding up in psychological groups now, like in terms of the model so much, because I think I've heard it's not so foolproof as this. It's not absolutely like one side is in charge of logic and absolutely one side is in charge of artistic modeling and creativity. But it seems the creative is the mother of it all. The chaos of creation is coming from this very imaginative place, this open, non-linear kind of feminine area. And then what happens is the other side, which would be like the mystics in Dark Crystal, and then what happens is you have the linear kind of labeling, logical mind, mathematical kind of mind, trying to make sense of that and creating form and order, kind of like Adam naming the animals and stuff like that. And now we're having, and that's the Skeksis, more kind of control masculine energy on one side of the Kabbalistic tree, like severity and mercy being the feminine. And this is beautifully painted in the Terrence Malick film Tree of Life. If you haven't seen that, I highly suggest it. But what we have is kind of this feminine waters of, creativity, and then we have on the one pillar side, and then we have the severity, kind of logical kind of control mechanisms, which is good. It's the Emperor card in Tarot. You need to kind of clear a path in the jungle to walk on sometimes, right? So there's necessity for these things, but it seems we're having the moment within the Dark Crystal where it's the unification of these things, the middle path, where the Skeksis is part, spoiler, Skeksis and mystics are part of each other. They've just been split in a very particular way. And I think our minds were part of a unity at one point, the Garden of Eden, or however these mythologies work. And it was kind of a unified time. We probably talked with God. We were one with God and one with the animals and all this shit in a very particular way, maybe more primitive. And then we fell into kind of a linguistic mode and a bicameral mode, and now we're kind of trying to unify that situation through evolving through time space. I mean, if you look at the East and West kind of hemispherics, you see the same thing kind of playing out when, like, mythologies, the East, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, these are very feminine and inclusive, and I'm not saying they don't have their masculine kind of points to them, but largely speaking, what you're getting with Descartes and the I think therefore I am and the kind of scientific revolution of the West, why we have technology of the internet and stuff like this right now that we're using to talk to each other, is because of a very rationalistic kind of approach. And now we're kind of getting to the, and you can see images of there was one, A Cave of Dreams, I think, was a movie that came out about the Cave of LaSalle paintings by Herner Herzog. Very good film if you haven't seen it. And it showed at one point some Buddhist monks using phones. And he's like, are they in meditation mode? Like, what's going on? There's this kind of confluence because of globalization and technology where we're kind of synthesizing these hemispheres together. The pillars are becoming one.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny that you bring that up because, again, I visually portrayed that through a huge sync in the recent Symbols of Power Part 4, literally showing how miraculous. I don't know how it happened or how I noticed this or how, whoever the artist that created the new artwork, the cover art for the new Dark Crystal series, how I synced that it was literally exactly what I was covering with the internal capsule of the corona radiata as seen in a diffusion tensor imaging scan of the human brain, was literally the exact same correspondence with the artwork on the cover of the new Dark Crystal series. And I literally synced that, how each, so it depicts the trine of the Dark Crystal, which was literally that was the whole theme of of their measurement of time, was through the trine conjunction of the three suns in the story. But so the cover art was literally that trine, which we could perceive kabbalistically as Kether, Bina, and Chokmah, which is again the three pillars of Freemasonry or Kabbalah, the 3 pillars of equilibrium, of balance, and again the merging of the two pillars, or the 2 hemispheres, of course, as well, but literally symbolically shown as directly corresponding anatomically with the human brain, or what we could perceive as human consciousness itself, again, which were directly unified in this symbolism. You'll have to see the one of the clips from the Part 4 film to know what I'm talking about here, but it was literally unified by the dark crystal at the center, which again I identified in the film as being the pineal gland, because of course that's literally the pineal gland produces the calcite crystals inside the pineal gland, which is literally, it's activated in darkness. So again, the dark crystal. So multiple layers of meaning there, but also, yes, it's actually scientifically shown that it's not so dualistic, that the right brain doesn't just focus on abstract or artistic endeavors, whereas the left hemisphere only focuses on analytical and logic and reasoning. The truth is that we utilize the entire brain for all of these processes, but what it is shown scientifically is that the right hemisphere is more in charge of larger or more grandiose perspectives, whereas the left hemisphere is more in charge of the minutia. And evolutionarily speaking, they have shown that, for example, the way to portray this would be like, say you're in the wild somewhere and you're drinking from a lake or a stream or something, and say you're in Africa, and there could be crocodiles or something, lurking in that stream or in that water. And so you're using the right hemisphere to focus on what's going on around you. Say you're an animal in nature. And so you're using that right hemisphere to focus on the big picture. In other words, the movement of objects around you, to be watchful of predators, sneaking up either from in the water or around you, lions or something like that. Whereas the left hemisphere is focusing on the specific task at hand, the more immediate things. So the right hemisphere is more focused on the larger picture, the big picture, the more abstract in that sense, whereas the left hemisphere is focused on the more immediate task at hand. But again, unified symbolically as in the dark crystal symbolism as literally the human brain, unified with the pineal gland or with the dark crystal at the center of it all, at the center of it all, your eyes.
David Bowie was a straight Starman. I actually use Starman Tarot nowadays when I pull cards, so I feel that real hard. And maybe I'm shifting gears a little, and not totally, but this kind of makes me think of some stuff, because what we're talking about is almost a pixelation of awareness. Like we're becoming like these as I sometimes tell my brother, who's more of a pragmatic skeptic, though he's a Gemini, he's not nearly as woke as I would hope. I'm like, the case is the matter. Like, whatever it is what it is, right? Whatever the case is the matter. And then there's multiple levels to that, because nothing is just anything. So kind of like what we're saying, the pineal gland is a body part, but it is also the dark crystal in a Jim Henson lens. And it's also, I don't know what, and by the way, I only got halfway through Symbols of Power 4, but I did watch all of them up to that point. There's only so much time in a day. But, when there's certain Egyptian deities, I think it was Ptah or one of these is kind of in the middle of the brain, and it's like the creation myth starts with him dreaming the dream and kind of coming to awakening. It just, I think in a weird way, as a kind of disassociative aside, as a double Gemini, I kind of have a Janus situation going on where I can be multi-faced about things pretty readily, and I kind of laugh at myself, and I kind of look at myself and say, why are you so surprised? Like, this has to be embodied somehow. Like, Carl Sagan would say, like, if you want an apple pie, you have to build a universe. It's like, if we want to have consciousness kind of express itself and experience itself, it's going to go through these modalities and these kind of systems and fleshings out. I guess what just fascinates me is that this is happening Egypt is one of the higher cultures of understanding, maybe one of the direct Atlantean kind of extents or whatever, but you get this stuff in Mayan mythology, you get this stuff in Hindu mythology with the cross-section of the brain and Ganesh, like you've pointed out. Like, this stuff is replete everywhere, and I'm just not, I'm giggly, like kind of like a fucking monk in a cave kind of hitting enlightenment or whatever sometimes, where I'm just like, wow. Like, I was having kind of like I said back in 2003 in my high school era, I was having out-of-body experiences because basically, you'll find this fascinating, Cullen, I was kind of self-initiating out of nowhere. I was in high school, I was doing kind of dual enrollment, and my schedule was Swiss cheese, basically. During college break, like winter break, I didn't have courses, so I didn't go, and I had all this spare time on my hands, so I was done with school by third period kind of thing, and I was just like, all right, what am I going to do? And out of nowhere, I started running on my treadmill, going full on, like as fast as I could, level 10 on the treadmill for like an hour or two, listening to G-Unit or shit like that on loop, and getting into a high level trance state, and then hopping off and getting my breathing to like the longest intervals I could, basically, and getting into a low-level trance state. And I don't even know why I was doing this. It was just kind of led by the spirit shit. And all of a sudden, after 2 weeks of doing this, I had my only, at this point, out-of-body experience. I saw my spirit, silver body popped out, went to the astral realm, was pretty crazy shit. But the point is, I forgot what my point was, but I guess the idea where I was going with this is there's a pixelation of awareness where the case is the matter. It is what it is, but then we become aware of it, and going through that awareness process is what we call initiation. And it's not a judgment thing. Not everybody can be dealing with this. Like, there was Pythagoras, but there was also wet nurses and bakers and shit in Greece. So it takes all kinds. It just seems the availability of awareness is increasing with digital technology and globalization and the internet, and all these systems kind of synergizing and coming together with people like yourself, myself, and Rafael, dare I say, and SyncBook people, where it's just like we're kind of picking up all the crumbs of various cultures, Hansel and Gretel style, and where they lead is this kind of apotheosis, in a way, this kind of moment of becoming aware of self as God, and everything is infinitely relative and scopic, and everything is interconnected, and just all the stuff we're talking about. I don't know if there's anything you want to kind of wrap up on that front, but I wanted to kind of get into some other topics too, if you were okay with that.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so thank you so much for your amazing illuminations, both of you. What I may like to mention, Jim, as in terms of yin and yang and different sides, part of the reason why I may sound lofty at times is precisely also because I'm familiar with works. I'm pretty sure, Cullen, I've seen some of your stuff at some point as well, but people like Dan Winter, who speaks a lot about the DNA and some kind of strange black hole dynamics and all these relationships, or people like Michael Tessarian pointing out the symbolism, newer people like Mark Passio, then modern ones, let's say, like Cullen, Jordan Maxwell, who's done talks on basic symbolism, let's say, and Hollywood for many, many years. So for me, it's kind of like all the demystification we can possibly do, both in terms of the creation of consciousness or the creation of experience, in terms of what determines what I experience, which of course people by now know I contend is based on belief. And then also, of course, see that all these intricate relationships, as Cullen is pointing them out, for example, are just the representation of this ultra-synchronized perfect order, and it's not really materially reducing it, because as far as I understand all these relationships, they all point towards frequencies and this like etheric connective realm. So they all, in a sense, are pointing upwards, dare I say, or just again prove that we are made of frequencies. So then again, you learn basically how your own system works, how these frequencies and these chemical processes are actually generated. You understand the myths, where I would also say they are not only biologically true, as you have been pointing out, but probably also real stories on many different levels. I come more and more to believe that this is holographically playing out on all levels. But however, understanding this properly, then you can, if you want to, of course, accelerate that process. And that would be this whole idea, again, what the New Age may be naively speaking of the fourth density awareness and so on and so forth, integration of consciousness, integration of these polarities. But then again, it's just a very real process which may not be the point, but may even be measured in a sense, but most certainly may be understood individually by everyone, but where there may also be, as with many things in nature, collective templates, which we can simply learn, which Taoists and many other religions have talked about in many different aspects, and now can be put together again, even in a very visually appealing and trippy way, as Cullen is doing, and making even more connection synchronistically and syncretically. And then, in a sense, to me, it's almost like recreating the original source knowledge through the synthesis of all the broken up pieces. So, yeah, thank you very much, Cullen.
Yeah, I just want to say, Rafael, real quick, I wasn't saying like you're lofty in a bad way. I love you to death, Rafael. You're one of the people, I mean, we met because you read my DMT trip report and I was on acid and you called and you gave me a channeled tarot reading or whatever. So my thinking is that, and this is some abstract kind of way to put this, I feel very much like the corpus callosum. And the one side of the brain, the kind of rational linguistic kind of form side, is more the Cullen angle, and then you tend to be more the creative side. And it's not one is better than the other or anything like that. It's just like a different approach to the well, if that makes sense. You're coming at the same water source of life, but it's just from the different side of the pond or whatever. But we're drinking from the same shit, so don't think I was hating on you at all, bro.
No, that's not the point, and that's not what I was saying. Maybe what I'm saying is what has kind of been alluded to already, is that it's not really either or, but what I would add to this is that, and also I'd be curious as to your opinion, Cullen, but actually you've explained it, just as you mentioned, that actually your approach is quite intuitive. So I would say that if you want to progress up to a certain level of understanding, especially in a, as I would say, positively polarized fashion, overall an integrative approach, you need to be quote-unquote quite advanced or be at a basic stable level to be able to even sustain and process that type of knowledge and possible cognitive dissonance and reintegration and fusion. Otherwise you're not ever even getting there, and you see, let's say, the as they say, how do they say, the wheat is separated from the chaff, when then people pretty soon may take quote-unquote wrong turns or extra rounds pretty early on the left or the right side by either completely daydreaming about unrelated stuff no one can understand, or becoming so specific so quickly that they don't see the forest for the trees.
Well put.
Yeah, exactly. I've always thought that everything is it's never. It's never this or that. It's never either or. It's always this and that and more.
Both and simultaneity. It's a wave and a particle.
Thank you. And this is the perfect moment to take a short break and play some music. Actually, I'm going to hijack the playlist right now. Later we're going to see whether you approve or not. I'm going to play Lauryn Hill, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Everything is everything. We'll be back in a few minutes. Team Rabbit Hole Edition 12 with Lifting the Veil, Jim Cullen. How are you? Once again, thank you so much for providing the most amazing processes and thought forms up to this point. Jim, I think you had a few more questions.
Well, that was a beautiful choice, I must say. I got a little verklempt, a little emotional, just because it's hitting home in a lot of ways. I just was turned on. I mean, you had suggested to read the Emerald Tablets of Thoth a long time ago. I had the PDF, and I've always just kind of kicked that can. And been like, I'm doing all sorts of other stuff. Colin understands how this feels. We're just like, I've got a lot on my plate. I'm not sure if I can eat the dessert right now or whatever, like that kind of vibes. And the long story short, through synchronicities, of course, why wouldn't they be? Maru, this astrologer, quantum astrologer, had posted a conversation between two gentlemen, Billy Carson and somebody else. And they were discussing the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. And so basically this weekend when I was doing street security, which is what I'm doing in Australia for concerts, festivals, I was doing Lizzo, and all these people were rapping, and I was listening to the Emerald Tablets. And I'm just in this weird integrative point is the point. So that song was very, very resonant with where I'm at, and it is beautiful. And in a weird way, she's saying, change is it's got to come, but change is the constant. Progress and the perception of progress, and therein is kind of the adaptive factor here. I don't know. I have some ideas where I want to kind of take this conversation, but I didn't know if Cullen had any thoughts.
Oh, on that? No, not really.
Word. All right, so not shifting gears entirely, but kind of taking a different perspective, because I think the beauty of it all, as Rafael points out, and always helps tether me back to, which is why I appreciate the fuck out of you, Rafael, as a friend and a colleague, is that it's all one. It's all good. It's okay. Enjoy the ride kind of thing. So I think that's a beautiful place to find oneself and to tether to. So I do appreciate the fuck out of you for that.
This may actually be an interesting question for Cullen. So even if I can understand you may not wish to reveal too much about your personal speculation and have already stated your confusion, as Bashar would pronounce it, as a very positive thing, as different aspects coming together and a moment of reorientation, I would be very interested in terms of, let's say, your generalized approach. Would you say you have a positive outlook the more you learn, or would you say it's depressing you? Because this is what I always find very interesting with all of these rabbit holes and all of these things, is how then people choose to deal with it, or how they get along with the information they take in and how they interpret it overall in terms of their general feeling, let's say.
As far as like my own process, no, I never get depressed. As long as I'm learning something new, and I constantly have to be learning new things. Otherwise, that's when I am not content, and that's when the only time I'm not happy is when I'm not learning new things, or having my mind stimulated in sort of the same fashion, because when we learn new things, we literally do get a physical hit of dopamine in the brain. So it's literally we can get physically addicted to learning, which is great. And I mean, that's really the primary addiction that pretty much everyone should have, and is learning new things. So as long as I am constantly immersed in just something fascinating, and that's it. I've got we could go on a whole rabbit hole on just that word itself right there, and I've literally got full presentations incorporating just that one etymology of the fascination, and that will be coming in. I don't know if it's in my next Symbols of Power or the one after that, but I've got several in the lineup right now that I'm working on with big segments on that about the fascination. It essentially is the enchantment. It's the so that's what it's all about. But as far as people's reactions, the only thing that that's not less than ideal through all of this, and I had never experienced this up until very recently, basically since Flat Earth came onto the scene, and then after that Donald Trump, and then after that QAnon, and then after that the carnivore diet. And so it's only things like that tend to be that tend to bring some sort of frustration or anything to me, especially as far as people's reactions. But before that, it was all amazing. Everyone would have these really awesome revelations, and they would share all of that with me. So it was a reinforcing positive loop cycle that I learn new things, everyone else shares in additional syncs to that, and that just builds on the puzzle. But it hasn't been like that ever since the Flat Earth came out. I don't know what happened, but now nobody shares that awesome. Not, I don't want to say nobody, people like Jim and a select few. Let's just say that the pool has greatly narrowed down as far as people still continuing. It's just basically my core group of friends that have managed to stick with me through all of this. But But yeah, it's very fascinating, and regardless, it's always an amazing process of learning and studying human behavior and the way we react, to information, and the way we share those things. But yeah, it's always been incredibly positive for me, and will continue to be so. I never see these things as, the one thing that I see as detrimental is that people really, just how easily people are misled, and how easily people can be fooled. And that's basically what has really been sort of my most current revelations. But before that, I was a little bit naive, or sort of just didn't really fully understand just how easily people could be misled.
What may be interesting is that while there may now be somewhat more divisiveness perceived, both because there are a few very contentious topics, like, as you mentioned, so-called flat Earth, and so-called climate change, and other so-called political divides. And then I assume this is reinforced by algorithm changes, and search bubbles, and filter bubbles, and social media bubbles, and strange algorithms. So, this is my assumption in that regard. However, I'm very happy that overall it's a positive experience for you.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's definitely mostly it's definitely the algorithms have been, that's the major driving factor between the difference of what I was talking about as far as earlier on in our timeline. Basically, yeah, I'm sure we probably all noticed this, that as far as social media.
Yes, as far as social media, please continue.
Yeah, sorry, my finger keeps slipping off the thing. Yeah, we were literally in a golden age of information sharing, and all of this amazing information coming to light, especially leading up to 2012, and then following shortly after 2012 is when everything really just started exploding in such an amazing way. And there really was this awesome great awakening happening. And as far in contrast to the way it is now, it's I don't see any awakening happening anymore. But that's just my personal perspective. Of course there still is, but it seems like now it's just a great dumbing down, where it's so obviously the algorithms have definitely changed in recent years, and they've cracked down on a lot of that information that was really abundant and easy to, and there wasn't so much, it's just so much distraction and clickbait and all of that, just as little as a few years ago. So that's definitely what I see.
What may be interesting, however, is, Jim, right away, just briefly, is that, of course, this would point out that potentially the less we are seeing it online in terms of recommended videos and so on, of course, it's a simple programming change, or even you see maybe less activity of certain friends or whatever, even though my Facebook mainly, for example, looks pretty good. But even here I'm aware I'm, maybe seeing 5% of whatever my people actually are sharing, or my friends on Facebook. So yeah, however, this may actually point out also that maybe, let's say, collectively speaking, this is another subset of a long dark night of the soul for many people, because now they may be seeing less, but many more may be processing it themselves. And I would just generally assume that there must be a lot more, because otherwise there would be absolutely no reason to censor or hinder it in any way, shape or form. So that, again, to me actually would be a great sign.
Exactly. I think we're all three of us are fairly familiar with Cloud Atlas. When that dropped in 2012, I saw it 3 times in the theater. I've seen it a few times since then. Profound film on multiple levels. Wachowski, now sisters, but the Wachowski crew that did that ahead of its time, for sure, on multiple levels in terms of cinematography and the concepts and the kind of I know it's based off of a book, which I have not read, but the idea here being they really hit that one out of the park. It was probably not that popular because it was just too insoluble for most people to grok straight up. It's just a big pill to swallow. But that kind of gets, actually, ironically, exactly where I want to go, because with the conversation, given that everything is awesome and everything is everything, it's all good, it seems there's colors or hues or shades or whatever algorithms, however you want to put this, that some people prefer to what I would prefer. I know in the past few years, Cullen would appreciate this, and I know, Rafael, you've dabbled with dietary kind of experimentation. I was a vegetarian for almost a decade, and then 2.5 years ago now, I went vegan, and I've been strict vegan since then. But things like veganism, things like just all sorts of like what you're saying, over information and disinformation kind of agendas, even the whole kind of Keck and Trump and QAnon. It seems like what happened is like consciousness has ratcheted up a gear, and because of that, there's more dynamics involved. So it's not that it's worse or better particularly, it's just there's more kind of options available, kind of like Nintendo systems went from 8-bit to 16-bit to 32-bit. We're upgrading the capacities at large on the whole field or whatever. So it seems like there's more potential for greater truths. Like I feel more embodied personally doing veganism and chakra meditations and psychedelics than I ever was when I was waking up and doing sync book stuff. Like that was way more kind of just like entertainment on acid kind of at that point. It was interesting and amusing and fascinating, but it wasn't true yet for me, and now it's true for me, and I'm walking the path a little more. But I kind of want to get into that. Like, how, Cullen, do you see I know you personally have been very targeted by algorithm shifts and almost to the level of YouTube demonetizations and not total deplatforming, but how do you see the antagonism of other that you don't necessarily resonate with? I wouldn't go as far as saying evil or bad guys. In the Thoth Emerald Tablets, it talks about dark brotherhoods and people who are more chaos elements. So it's part of the whole situation, order, chaos, whatever. But what's been happening in your neck of the woods?
Well, I was following you for a little while there until like the actual question came. But
I can recapitulate it if it helps.
Yeah. Please do.
All right. So, like what we're saying with, I was kind of just thinking about Cloud Atlas, where there's certain struggles being shown, whether it's human rights and slavery, and certain people subjugating other people versus other people emancipating individuals. And that kind of theme is replete. Certain themes are not they're eternal themes, perennial themes, right? So what happens is the slavery of 1800s Dutch trading company stuffs or whatever translates into the future to like synthesized human people who are basically slaves and don't live lives and are living off of Soylent Green style, like eating themselves stuffs. How, given that we understand at some kind of esoteric level that yin and yang are necessary, Skeksis and mystics are part of the whole, but they've kind of split, how do you try to go through the waters well of differentiation? Because for example, I'm not a carnivore at this point. I don't look at carnivores as evil, particularly. I know you probably have more of a political stand on this. I'm like, they're ignorant or they're lazy, and that's largely where their decisions are being made. And I can't judge them. That's their karma. I've kind of woken up to certain things, and I can't, like, basically I saw a PETA video on LSD once, and I was just like, I can never eat an animal again. I just became aware of the suffering at a very deep, visceral level. And now I'm like, if I don't, this sounds kind of woo, but it's like, I feel like animals and I are in a good wave, and I kind of relate to animal life better, and my energy levels are better, and I feel kind of more in tune with the universe being vegan and on a plant-based diet. Now that might be psychosomatic, kind of internal cognitive biases, and I'm like patting myself on the back and making a rose-colored glasses, but I think it's real. I can't prove this. My question was kind of like, given that we understand duality as a situation, we're in some pretty ratchet times, as the zeitgeist would reflect, like with the new Star Wars movie, for example. We're in a time where the light is kind of coming online more largely. I think, speaking, Kim Kardashian's a vegan now, all this kind of stuff. So people are waking up, but because of that, there is a systematized resistance against that by the establishment, if you want to put it that way, or the patriarchy.
I see what you mean now. Well, basically my view on all of that is, yeah, and when I was talking about carnivore diet, like I'm not just referring to, just average people who just happen to eat, I'm not referring to like carnists. Like I'm talking about like the actual people who are doing nothing but a carnivore diet. Like they literally think that plants are unhealthy, and they think that, well, number one, they think that animal foods are healthy, and they think that plants are unhealthy. So it's this complete inverse, this complete absolute 180 degree inverse of the truth, which is literally there's zero evidence to back any of that up. But so I'm not just, don't get me wrong, I'm not referring to just, your average person who, just isn't a vegan. They're still eating. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like the fringe, the craziest of the crazy, people on planet. And I mean, it's absolutely insane when you get. So in most of these carnivore diet, they're also flat earthers as well. So I mean, there's this huge correlation of complete science denial and delusion and just complete insanity. I mean, it's probably legitimately, toxoplasmosis, parasites literally infecting the brain, because that's what they do is they eat raw organ meats, which are loaded with literally pork tapeworms and all sorts of other shit. So, I mean, it's absolutely crazy. But on a more important, esoteric sort of interpretation is that your phrasing of the topic basically got me thinking of what I just saw the other day. I didn't realize it until then, but I didn't realize that Nietzsche had actually placed such a heavy importance on how valuable conflict was, because I've always had that point of view, and I've obviously, you can imagine that a lot of the quote unquote awake people, like on my YouTube channel or whatever, social media or whatever, have taken big issues with this. It's like, why I am such a fan of conflict, and it's, don't get me wrong, it's not like detrimental conflict. Like I've always seen conflict as this necessary, essential, as the most potential aspect for growth and evolution and progress, because for progress and evolution to occur, it is inherently physically dualistic in the physics of nature. Because there's obviously involution and evolution. So there is evolution, which is literally etymologically means a rolling outward. In other words, our expression in the outward world, in the physical world around us. Whereas the involution literally means to roll inward, because from the root word of volvere, which means to roll, which is literally, how all things go. All things roll out and they roll inward. Everything is the sacred spiral. It's the sacred wheel, which goes rolling along. So there's that dualistic aspect, which is inherent in nature and in the principles of nature itself, which I see as very valuable and actually essential. I mean, because we would just literally be nothing but oneness, and the universal consciousness, and I have this really unique perspective that I'm not sure if anyone else, sort of shares the same view as I do about this, but it's sort of a revelation that I had not too long ago where, it seems pretty obvious, but like when it hit me, it was like, for some reason I never thought about it this way, was that, what if what we call God, the universal one, the collective source mind that we all share, whatever you want to call it or think of it as, what if that's actually unconscious and in direct correspondence with our own awareness? What if as we become more aware of the physical, we start knowing more about the world that we live in, which is obviously what we can observe is happening in nature. We're just now starting to learn so many amazing things about the biological life around us. Like, we're only just now beginning to understand how important, the biosphere is, such as especially the microbiome in the human gut, directly corresponding to, for example, like the fragility of the biosphere in like the oceans, how important, the plankton cycle is for the oceans, and how important the whale's roles in actually creating a literal circuit that keeps the oceans clean, and so many different processes like that we really had no idea of up until just now. And it's so ironic, yet so fascinating that we're only just starting to learn about how important and how profound all of these processes with our natural, our animal brothers and sisters, our biological extensions of ourselves in nature, how important they actually are. And we're only just now starting to understand that as it's already becoming extinct, essentially. It's like we're just now starting to learn how incredible these things are, sort of when it's almost already too late, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to be like, negative or anything, because I don't.
I hear you.
Yeah,
As Morpheus said, fate, it seems, is not without a sense of irony kind of thing. It's like that.
Yeah. But yeah, so it's so interesting, like how much we're just now starting to learn about the world around us and how delicate it really is, and yet also how resilient it is simultaneously. It's so delicate, yet so strong and so resilient and so able to recover, just like the human body is. I mean, we can beat the shit out of this thing, and as long as we stop doing what harms ourselves, it will just instantly bounce back and really heal itself and recover in such a profound way. It's literally, we just have to get out of the way and stop doing the things that are causing harm. And that's the best, the best tool of progress and growth forward. And again, this is all the stuff that, this is where all of the esoteric knowledge is leading us. Like, this is where the pinnacle, this is where we've been coming all of these eons and all these ages and all these decades, which at some point in history, maybe we were already there. I truly believe that it was cyclical, and that at one point of time we did already know all of this stuff, and it was obvious to us, and we were living that way. But then came the fall of consciousness, and then we started to basically do all these harmful practices that largely, I think, arose from taking things too literally, and all of these, so many different things like that. But that's sort of too nebulous to really explain. But so I do think that effective tool for getting people to change, especially fear. Fear is actually the biggest driver of change. A lot of people say that love is the greatest force and motivator, and it is. It's very strong and very powerful. But honestly, personally, I think fear is probably a lot more powerful as far as getting people to act. And as we know, the controllers use this in a way to get us to act however they want us to. I mean, you can get someone in a state of fear, you can get them to do absolutely anything. I mean, you can get them to be your slave, you can get them to, do sexual favors for, whatever the hell you want, whatever your desire would be. I mean, you just put someone into fear, and, you can control and manipulate them any way you want to do. And so I think that definitely diet and lifestyle is the main driving factor of all of these things, and it's definitely the closest to home. It's something that we all share. It's something that we can't escape. It's something that we can't get around. It's just inherently there. So the more we become aware of it and immersed in it and understanding of it, through proper means, of course. I mean, we have to do good quality research. I mean, because so many people are just out there spewing, just their beliefs and their theories and opinions without any actual substance or weight to it. So I don't know. I'm sort of just rambling on at this point. So I don't know.
That's all good. What you're tapping into a little, though, is, and I don't know if Rafael wants to jump in. If you do. The idea of progress. It seems, I don't know enough about you guys to speak eloquently upon them, but it seems like that's kind of what's going on, cycles within cycles, where there have been eras of time when the conditions of consciousness and the conditions of the Tao, or however you want to put that, in the material world were in such a way. I mean, it's always been the same in a way. The song remains the same, but at some level, it was in a different octave, if you want to put it that way, or whatever. Or the orchestration was different. Maybe at the beginning of life, it was a single violin, and now we have an orchestra, and it's just kind of progressing. But what is your opinion on the idea of progress? Because obviously things like computing technology are great, and they're a consequence of very kind of certain things. I think it was Aleister Crowley that said, and I'm not a Crowley Elamite by any means, but he said like certain actions necessitate certain responses or something to that effect. So it's like, yeah, of course, if we fucking get like silicon-based technology and start having a post-World War II kind of unified Western cultural front, we're going to end up with a globalized digital technological world in a few decades. Like, it doesn't surprise me we're kind of the inheritors of the past to the degree that we are finding ourselves in the situation we stand in presently. But in my best, most lucid moments, I'm like, oh my God, this is all perfect. It's all working forward. I don't know why, Hitler happened, and I don't agree with it, but I guess it had to happen. And I don't know why Trump is president, but he's the collective id, and maybe we're processing, like I try to rationalize these things. What is your concept of like AI and where we're going with transhumanism?
Some easy questions for Cullen.
Were you asking me or?
Yes, Jim was asking you.
The conscious to whoever wants it, but I mean, my thinking is like we're coming from a place of like, wow. I mean, the first bit of this conversation was like, wow, look within and look at our body and our situation, our minds processing and all this. It's amazing, isn't it awesome? Everything is awesome, kind of thing. But then we kind of start looking out and saying, whoa. I guess in order to play a game, we have to have rules, and to have chess, you have to have opposing teams with different dynamics, and that's kind of what we're talking about with the Nietzschean necessity in a way of tension and conflict, like you were saying. But simultaneously, there's conflicts I would prefer not happen. Like I would rather us not be going into global crises because of having too. Like I was watching the video that you posted recently, and I reposted it today about. It's not so much human overpopulation that's the issue. It's we have cow farms and pork farms and stuff that is causing way more issues on resource scarcity and ozone issue. You see what I'm saying? I guess my question, if there was one, was like, it's all awesome, it's all good, but there are more preferable ways. How do you see? I mean, clearly you're a vegan, so you think doing that's a good thing, and doing the work personally, like you're saying, you're like Jordan Peterson, like clean your house kind of situation. Take care of, be a steward of your vessel, be a steward of your kingdom, all that shit. But how do you deal cognitively, personally? And I know Rafael, and I want both of your answers, but I think I know Rafael's more. How do you deal with the idea of other and conflict and less preference? Like, I don't think you like when YouTube cockblocks you, but in some weird esoteric, like, outward expanded mode, it's like it's all good or whatever. I do have a good way to answer that, but not as far as what the way that I could describe like conflict really. For example, what worked incredibly for me, and I know this through personal experiences, literally the entire Symbols of Power series, all of the best stuff that you can see on my channel, or any of the best work all of the work that I've ever done, in fact, is a direct result of someone challenging me. Basically someone trying to challenge me on one of my posts on Facebook or something. That's literally how all of my Symbols of Power series was created. It started as a response just in a comment on Facebook, debunking someone challenging me, or saying that I'm full of BS or whatever, and I literally just I started writing out a well thought out response. And this was back when I had more time on my hands to think like really really deep. And now I'm like so deep and actually trying to juggle all of this, like with the editing and actually trying to write stuff and put all this content out, that now I'm more in a state of confusion like than I was. But the point that I'm making is that literally it's all my best work came from people pushing me, people challenging me, people rubbing up against me in that source of abrasion, and when we think of like from a biological standpoint, that's literally it's both good and bad at the same time, just depending on how we let things essentially affect us or not. Is in a biological sense, that's things become toughened, tissues and organs and biological organisms, they become hardened
and by conflict, and that's literally what the etymology of callus means. A callus is literally a thickened, hardened part of skin as a result of rubbing up against something or something else rubbing up against it, so that it strengthens its boundary, so that it can resist that abrasion. Whereas the etymological sense, the linguistic sense, so that's the sense of callous, whereas callous emotionally means cold, or not as empathetic. It means hardened. It means essentially we associate it to cold-hearted. So it's that same etymological essence, a callus, like on the skin, and a callous, cold callous mallet. So it's interesting abrasion, and that opposition, it can bring out the best or the worst in us. And for me, it has definitely brought out literally the best aspects from within me. That's literally where I dig deep, and so I deeply appreciate that, and I try to evoke that in other people as well. And that's actually why I'm sort of so antagonistic these days, whereas I wasn't really. But also I think it's because my Mars midheaven right now, so I think that isn't the midheaven, you're the middle of your life, which is what I'm sort of almost approaching. So it's that martial nature sort of coming out of me as well. But I don't know, I'm sort of rambling on at that point. But yeah, conflict in that sense, I think, is definitely not only essential, but it can be very beneficial as far as causing us to go within and bring forth, like that. I forget which verse it is from the Gospel of Thomas. If you don't bring forth what is within you, what is within you will destroy you. But if you do bring forth what is within you, what is within you will save you. So I definitely.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that one.
Oh yeah. It's probably the most meaningful, or if not, definitely the most meaningful. It wasn't in the Bible, but one of the other. I think it was from the Nag Hammadi texts. But yeah, it's by far the most meaningful thing that I've found from the biblical scrolls by far.
Or if I had heard that, it was in one of your presentations, because I haven't read the Gospel of Thomas. If I had, it was talking more about the inner animal, or the inner serpent kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's you're full of these raw primal instincts. You're an inheritor on a long chain of processes, and in some way, we're being driven by primal urges and primal forces. And when you can kind of come to terms with that and learn to control and ride the serpent, as they say, it's like you're saying, there's a salvation in that. But if you're just consumed by the processes and you're ignorant of these processes within you, you'll be victim to them in a sense.
Yeah, it's like in astrology, letting the stars rule you rather than being the ruler of your stars. And exactly, it's like if you're not riding the chariot, the chariot's going to run you over.
That just made me think of that funny Ben-Hur scene as some old Charlton Heston movie where they're doing this horse race and this guy gets fucking run over. And it's the funny part is I'm pretty sure someone really got run over, and that was not a stunt. That was actually something gone wrong kind of thing. Not funny. But yeah, in a sadistic kind of way, it's like, oh God. But okay, so Rafael, did you have any 2 cents on this thing?
I'm good, you continue.
So, given that we find, because it's funny, it's a perspective. I'm one of the things. I was in Switzerland for a year at basically a Christian theological think tank as an RA, basically called L'Abri, and I was kind of I've had a lot of mystical Judeo-Christian experiences. My grandparents started Tim Keller's church in their fucking apartment. He's kind of a theologian, modern theologian. So I'm very well versed with Christianity. It's definitely part of the woof of where I'm coming from. But largely back in 2017, I was like, I'm becoming a mystic, and I'm kind of at the litmus here. I want to try to test these things with my knowledge now and see if they still hold weight or whatever. And they do largely. But the point is, where was I even going? Oh yeah, it seems like tension, and I don't know if Rafael would agree with this, but the idea is that in order to have a story in a Joseph kind of Campbell sense, which is what we're a part of, the greatest story ever told of consciousness experiencing itself, like in an Alan Watts kind of way, it's like we're involuting on ourselves as consciousness and diversifying in the womb of self in an oral fashion or something crazy like that. But the idea is, for stories to occur, you have to have characters. For stories to occur, you have to have a setting, i.e. time and place. And for stories to occur, you have to have tension and release. It's just necessarily part of what makes stories. There's kind of a DNA to the structure of even music. Like if it's just one note, that's beautiful. I love chakra tones. You know, certain tonal frequencies, you can get zone out and fucking become one with them. But when we listen to music, we're listening to stuff where it's like there's a build and then there's a drum flam or all this stuff. Like it seems to necessitate you see what I mean? Like tension release, like harmony, disharmony, and it's not. And what happens is if you start focusing too much in even an academic sense, you get Schoenberg's like 12-tone music systems where it just sounds like cacophonic noise or whatever. And I think the definition of noise in music, I'm not sure. I haven't looked up the etymologies, but it's like organized and repeated kind of patterns that are pleasing versus just kind of like randomized things. But it seems just inherent in the nature of the structure of reality, which is a story. We're in a story as storytellers telling ourselves a story. I mean, that's kind of redundant, but it seems to be the case. And what we find is that tension is necessary, conflict is necessary. And I think there might be kind of a bell curve where it's like, if you have no conflict, it's static. It's kind of like in the model of evolution of the universe that we have through science, which may or may not be ultimately true, but I'm kind of with it for right now, the Big Bang model, where it's like, all right, boom, let there be light. So whatever, this happens, and then all this, or whatever, two fucking parallel multiverse dimensions collide, or whatever the fuck is happening happens, and all of a sudden you have basically a heated universe of plasma potential. It's not formed yet for like 1 billion or 2 billion years. It's just static, and that would be on the early end of the bell curve where there is no tension. And then what you start having is through change, through processes and entropy in some way, the coalescing and condensation of material into elements, stars explode, eventually you get the fucking Bill Gates and internet and all this shit, right? So it seems on the front end of the bell curve, if there's not enough tension and dynamos in the story, that nothing happens in a way. And then if you have too much tension and stuff at the end of the bell curve, it's like it's too chaotic for anything to form, like at the event horizon of a black hole or something like that. It's just like that's too much chaos. It's not going to be conducive to life or understanding or anything like that. And then you have this kind of middle area. Let's say 80% of the situation is varied, and that it's different kind of flavors and spectral. I don't even know the right word. Becomings, whatever the middle 80% of a bell curve is, it's like there's options there, and it's not like one option. It's like many little paths within the 80% of what Goldilocks conditions might look like for stories. So I don't know. I'm kind of rambling too, but I totally hear what you mean, and it seems that it's much like the Fool's Journey or in Tarot, the Fool's Journey and the cards. Different places and stations in life necessitate different kind of realities and resonances. So when you're young, you have a lot of lifeblood, and you're just ready to go tackle the world. When you hit your like kind of Saturn return, 28. You start contemplating things in a more serious nature, saying, what am I here for, et cetera, et cetera. These are good and necessary things. So it doesn't mean the Hermit card is good and the Emperor card is bad. These things are good for what they are when they are. To everything, there's a season kind of thing. I'm rambling. Rafael, you got any contributions?
Well, conflict, simple association now, conflict, confluence, flowing together of ideas, which can of course be very positive, or even for integration, conflict may be necessary. However, of course, the question always is conflict on what level, and I would even say that neither order nor chaos are inherently positive nor negative unto themselves in terms of whether they're actually building something larger and creating emergent or creating conditions for emergent development, or whether they are destroying or breaking down something. As I understand, even too much order actually is then detrimental to the overall health or progression of the structure, just as you mentioned, and may actually be overall be considered negative. So all I would guess is that it all depends on what level you choose to play out that conflict and how well you're able to deal with it. And even here we can say there are phases, and we apparently still have individuals killing each other, which by now I would say that we are ready to resolve also these conflicts in a different way. And this may also be part of the development, which doesn't then mean that conflict will cease, but that conflict may be dealt with very differently and much more constructively, and does not need to cause suffering in that extreme sense as it does now.
Well, what kind of scares me, and I was watching Cullen's video, it was kind of an amalgamation of a few like plant-based news and other kind of excerpts you were kind of pulling together. But basically, it seems we're in an era where the patriarchy, or those that are kind of the gatekeepers of information, and those, like the Rothschilds or whatever, these kinds of people, and those that benefit from their structures are doubling down. There was something specifically, I wrote it down, called the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act that apparently Bush fucking signed into a law back with the Patriot Act. You want to talk about that for a second?
We nickname it the Activism Equals Terrorism Act, which is basically made it illegal for any form of documentation within slaughterhouses or any type of animal agricultural operation, where any type of documentation can be labeled as domestic terrorism, which is extremely detrimental for many different purposes, whether you're thinking like activism or conspiracy or not, such as even just like the workers of these operations, like say if someone gets like sexually harassed or something in any of these industries, like they cannot report it because they would legally be a domestic terrorist.
The irony to me is, and this is maybe just a sign, because I'm coming from a Christian lens, where it's like in the end days, like right will be wrong, wrong will be right, all this kind of stuff. And when I say end time, I think we're entering an aeon shift. Let me be clear. I don't think it all just kind of ceases, particularly. I think it's just we're shifting the gears of the story into another kind of realm and domain, like first to second gear kind of thing. But anyway, back in the day when children were being exploited in America or abroad, wherever, in factories, and you had food, like pre-FDA kind of standards where it's like, like in Les Miserables, there's actually a scene where Master of the House has this song. It's really great. But the guy who's basically a crooked, self-absorbed kind of materialistic driven kind of selfish person is putting, like, he's talking about all the things that he's putting into these sausages. He's like, kidney of a cat, liver of a horse, like all this shit. It's like, we tell them it's really good, but the stuff that's going in is not. Which the point of what I'm saying this is, there was a time when information, I think it was called The Jungle. There was a book that came out that basically made people aware of the fact that the food industry was not what it was saying it was, right? Like the contents of the food was detrimental and unhealthy, and people were cutting corners and being fucking sketchy. And that led to kind of systems being put in place for order and authority and, regulation, essentially, for food. But now these systems have ossified to the degree that they're trying to self-protect, and they're creating laws through legislation and lobbying and stuff that basically make it so awareness is, in the light of illumination and kind of open source understanding, is not possible. It's demonizing people who want. I mean, I'm not saying you have to go free the ferrets and like open every cage. I would prefer that, but it's like there's limits here. But it makes it so that one can't even go into that without potentially going to Guantanamo style. It's insane. The people that have the keys to the car are driving this thing into the wall at 90 miles an hour, crash test dummy style, and there's going to be a lot of collateral damage because of that. But if people like us have conversations, and in such a way that is hopefully helpful and fun and honest, maybe we can turn the tides. I don't know if you like. Sometimes in my best days, I'm like, especially after seeing the new Star Wars, I'm like, we just have to know there's other ones like us out there. Find the others, Timothy Leary style. Like find the others, be with them, create culture, create the energy, like do rituals, all make the magic, and you can overturn these kind of evil empires or whatever, like Rage Against the Machine style. But at the same time, it feels like there's a doubling down I haven't been watching the news, but I mean, I guess even Trump's rattling sabers with Iran right now. Australia's they've got fires that are ravaging, but then you have people saying these are weaponized fires. It's really hard to even understand what voices to hear anymore. So I guess my question is, how do you stay sane in an insane seeming world?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I had some really awesome thoughts about when you were going off about the music and conflict and all of that, but now we're on a different topic.
No, go back to it if you want. I mean, even with the story in the Silmarillion, J.R.R. Tolkien's kind of preface.
That's exactly what I was about to mention. Yeah.
Oh, go for it. Talk.
Yeah, it was literally I was like, oh my god, I need to talk. I was like, that's exactly what Melkor and the intro to the Silmarillion was all about. It was about the harmony and the discord that Melkor literally created the conflict, which is what created the whole story. I mean, but then it which also ties into my exact musical preferences. That's literally the type of music that I listen to. Like, that's why I like the type of metal, the metal, hardcore metalcore that I listen to, which is a very unique genre. It's got to be a perfect blend of both light and dark, which in the music that I listen to manifests as both really awesome, preferably high pitch, clean vocals is what I like, as well as really deep, heavy screams and growls. But the lyrics also have to be really on point. In other words, it has to have a progressive message, or at least a meaningful message, which tells a compelling story, which is what makes at least the music that I listen to so, like, that's what makes the hair stand up on, my hair stand up, and that's what makes, it literally gives a rush and a surge of energy that makes you feel alive. And that rush right there is literally what they attribute to as the Mozart effect, which many, especially in I guess we could say in the New Age, community, just automatically assume that, oh no, it only has to be peaceful, classical music. They think that it's only Mozart that does it. The Mozart effect, it applies to the actual feeling that you get from listening to any music. It has to move you. It has to, compel you, and that's what the Mozart effect is. It's not an effect from listening to Mozart. I mean, maybe for a very select few people might get that, but for most people, like, the Mozart's not gonna, it's not gonna do that for them. But yeah.
So basically, it's getting jazzed up by music. Essentially, is the Mozart effect.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and.
It's funny because I know you like metal more, and I tend not to go that way, but I get that exact fucking feeling with Rage Against the Machine music, like the old stuff off of Evil Empire.
Yeah,
I'm like, this is Stormtrooper fucking music, like this is very militant kind of stuff, but it gets the blood boiling and gets kind of enlivened.
Yeah, exactly. It's creating, it's creating that motion and that movement, so it's what all good art does, which is to comfort the disturbed and to disturb the comforted. So in other words, it's creating a flux, it's creating an influx from, people who are perfectly comfortable, so therefore they're not going to want to change at all, especially not for the, not for the positive and not for the negative. They're just stuck in rigidity, which is okay, for certain periods of time, but in certain periods of time, it also is detrimental. So, in that sense, whereas also, the people who are, too disturbed chronically, or, way too, unhinged, it's, they seek out those energies that, that bring them peace and balance and calm. So it's this perfect, it's everything, it's a cycle. I see everything like a lava lamp, there's all things, people are always talking about the ascension, and we're all moving towards ascension. Well, the thing about the ascension from a physics perspective is that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So for every ascension, there is simultaneously a descension, and that's exactly what I'm seeing, especially with the social media, is for the great awakening to happen, people are also falling asleep even more deeply at the same rate, at least on certain levels, in certain regards.
By flux, do you mean torque, essentially?
Not really. I mean like flow. I mean in exchange. I mean like in the sense that, like a lava lamp. For something to rise, something else has to fall, like a counterbalance, a counterweight. For something to rise up, for the tree to grow to the heights, it has to equally reach, extend equally, if not even, as deep into the ground. So it's for every opposite, every reaction, there's an equal opposite reaction. So I'm just referring to basically polar dynamics.
So in that sense, very similarly represented in the rise of Skywalker, here's the rise of, that lava. The Emperor and the Empire had to come up with the old, the one order or whatever, and it was pretty brutal, negative forces, which kind of ties up what I'm talking about. It seems things are getting, in some ways, like it's always darkest before the dawn, and like when you cast a light on something, the shadows become more concretized and more kind of potent in a way. It seems certain things are happening where I feel like, and I talked to Mike the Peacealer, astrologer, about this, where it's like guild wars, he calls it, but it seems like it's the sorting hat these days, where people are starting to become aware of their natures, so honoring that well. It's like, if you're Slytherin, be Slytherin. If you're Ravenclaw, be Ravenclaw. But then people are finding that they are like, Slytherin is not Ravenclaw, though they're in Hogwarts together. They are not ultimately reading from the same pamphlets or whatever.
yeah, exactly. It's exactly like, I don't know if it was it? I think it was The Last Jedi, where I think Snoke was saying that your equal in the light will rise to meet. You're growing more powerful, and so too will your equal in the light rise to meet you. And it's exactly that. But so many revelations in of course, The Last Jedi sucked, but this more recent one, The Rise of Skywalker, was a little bit better with what they had to do to try to save that whole catastrophe that happened with the last one. But so that's exactly why, and I intend to make a video about this. I'm not sure how deep I will go into it, because I don't want to spend time. I'm not very good at doing like the theory like so many other people do. But the symbolism is incredibly, it's so obvious that it's like almost not even worth doing a symbolic breakdown of, because it's like, oh well, obviously your electromagnetic spectrum, your red, the blue, the light, the dark, the polar aspects. But it's so much more of everything that I covered throughout all of the Symbols of Power series, especially in this most recent one, and we'll be doing in other ones, which is the dyad. It's literally they're a dyad in the Force. So again, it's always the Hyros Gamos, with not just the male and female, but with the light and the dark, the red and the blue. But it's literally they were the dyad, which is the unification of the two. So obviously to become to end the cycle, essentially, and not to end the cycle, but to just to quote unquote bring balance to the Force, which is it's basically the twins, the Gemini, the dyad. So it's the twins come together, and not like incestually, but you know what I'm talking about. Is
I get what you're putting down. And just to say this, three things, and then I don't know if we're out of time, but it's getting there. One thing is that you David Bowie said it. He's like, don't play to the audience or the gallery. It's like, do what you got to do, and it's okay to know what people think, but like, you've got a song to sing that may or may not be pleasant to other people, so you can't listen to them saying that's out of tune, or I didn't like how you did that, or whatever, because that's going to make you doubt yourself and not probably project your song from the fucking diaphragm the same way, like your question. I tend to hear you be like, well, it's not popular, and this people think this. Is like, it's good to know what people think. It's good to be aware of the opinions of others. Like, I'm not a fascist. I don't think other opinions don't matter, but it's also good, to stay on your path and not swerve. I have a lot of Uranus energy and stuff, so I think I can naturally do that, where it's like in an 11th house sun, so it's like I'm a Gemini, but with Aquarius flavor. So it's just like, I'm glad we can talk. I don't give a fuck at the end of the day. So it's like, you got to kind of pick that mantle up a little more, I feel. Secondarily, I was going to say, I'm so stoked that this morning I pulled my cards. 3 of Cups, this has been like that, like hardcore, and 3 of Pentacles, and the Divine Animal Oracle card I pulled was number 33, so both 33, the 3s, or whatever, chameleon change. This is about becoming aware of where we're at and then adapting as needed. if you're a pawn, you have certain moves. If you're a rook, you have certain moves. If you're on the white versus the black in the chess game, your goals are different for the different sides. Being aware of these levels of the game, because life is a game and we're playing this game with each other, is helpful. But I think holding on loosely ultimately is part of it too, because if we over-identify with these things, you end up with Hitlers and shit, and it's just not a good look for anybody. But I don't know if, Rafael, am I wrong? Are we running out of time here?
We have as much time as we like, however we can slowly wrap it up.
Well, I'm in an Airbnb in Brisbane, and I've got to drive back to Gold Coast, and I think in the next few minutes I've got to pack and leave. So I was like, this works perfectly timing-wise, but I kind of have to wrap it up. I want to thank Cullen so fucking much for coming on. I know it was pulling your arm on here, and there was a lot of uphill Sisyphean kind of moments, but dude, this has been a gem for me, probably my favorite so far talk with Rafael. Rafael, you didn't say much, but I know you probably enjoyed it.
Well, that's why I ain't saying much.
Perfect.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. Yeah, I'm really glad to I finally got on to do this, and yeah, it just takes some pulling my leg to finally get me to come into alignment to be able to clear my schedule to do all this, because that's the thing is, yeah, I'm just so scattered, trying to do so many things all at once.
You're cool, dude. I'm tenacious, so I don't let crumbs fall through the cracks that are necessary food, and I knew that talking to you would be a good and proper thing for my process, probably for others. Hopefully they get that. I think there'll be some links in the comments and stuff, but do you want to just kind of tell people where they can see your stuff, how they can kind of become aware more of your content?
Well, my YouTube channel and everything, all of my platforms are Lifting the Veil. Twitter, social, or Instagram, Facebook. Mostly YouTube is my main thing, Lifting the Veil, but all of my exclusive works, like all the stuff that my rough drafts, all the stuff that I'm working on that I haven't showed anybody, or the stuff that I'm not ready to release, like on the broader audience, is at patreon.com/liftingtheveil, and it won't show up if you just search like the Patreon page, because it's 18 and up, it's age restricted, so one of their rules is they won't show it unless you specifically go to the exact URL. So yeah, it's patreon.com/liftingtheveil. That's until I get I'm working on getting a really good, like, legit website up right now that I don't have to archive all my stuff on Patreon. So that'll be up, I'm not sure when, but sometime in the near future. So that's my main project right now.
Word. Well, keep trucking, bro, because I know that sometimes it feels, like you're shouting into an abyss and maybe no one hears, or it's uphill and the system is, cock blocking and gatekeeping. But trust me, you've made a big impact on my psyche and my process, and I, Bruce Lee bow to you for that shit, because without some of the stuff you've dropped, I would be a little less woke.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for all that you're doing to help share my stuff and everyone else's stuff. And you're basically just linking everybody together. And that's the biggest service that, we can all do for each other.
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you so much, Cullen. Yeah, you have any last words?
Any last words? Yeah. Thank you, Rafael. It was great to be on, and I look forward to listening to more.
Basically, I just want to remind people that, and I'm going through this too. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. This is not a perfect dance. We learn through mistakes, and we learn through each other. So just look out in the world and be grateful for it. It's such a privilege to be a conscious, embodied being, even in such times as these, but here we is. So enjoy the ride well, and just try to find the others. Reach out to other people that you think are on similar wavelengths, and try to create culture and community. That's really all we can do these days.
Thank you so much, guys, and as we continue to explore the rabbit hole together, see you all at the next junction. Last track for tonight is gonna be by Redraft and Jane Nomad, Keep It Original Mix. Enjoy.
I'd love to hear your comments on that in the section down below, so that way I can go through and read some of what you have to say about it. If this is the type of content that interests you guys, make sure to check out my full presentations, as well as my further research, my further films, and my previous videos that you can find in the full archives at patreon.com/liftingtheveil. The link will be in the description below, and all my cited source links will be in that article description as well. And as always, thanks for your time, guys. This is Lifting the Veil, and I'll see you in the next video.